low body weight. Children are considered to be vulnerable even to background levels of toxins, and research is now detecting subtle effects on the population as a whole. Miriam Jacobs is a nutritionist who recently carried out a preliminary study which confirmed suspected high levels of PCBs and dioxins in farmed salmon. Recent publication of her research produced a number of letters from parents worried about feeding farmed salmon to their children.
I'm concerned about the dietary intake of small children, infants, yes.
Why particularly?
Because their dietary intake will be far greater than it will be for an adult based on body weight consumption ratio. An ongoing study in Holland, they've been monitoring just for background levels of PCBs in very young children and going through up to school age. And it's been found that there's a greater risk of infection and there's a greater impairment of cognitive development in those children that have higher intakes of PCBs. If I was considering pregnancy or breastfeeding, I would be concerned.
Why particularly?
Because all the fats are bioaccumulating breast milk. Breast milk levels of organochlorines and dioxins and PCBs are quite worrying. It doesn't, that doesn't mean that breastfeeding shouldn't continue, quite the reverse. Breastfeeding is still, breast milk is still the best for your child. But I would make every effort to make sure that my breast milk was as low as possible in these contaminants.
Miriam Jacobs' conclusions can be seen in relation to World Health Organization advice. 2 years ago, the WHO sharply reduced levels for the acceptable daily intake of dioxins and PCBs. This advice takes account of a growing body of research, including the Dutch studies. The European Union has followed suit, revising guidelines to 1/10 of earlier levels. The UK has yet to make a similar reduction. Meanwhile, some products from fish farms arrive at the supermarkets stating on the package that health professionals recommend 2 or 3 portions of farm salmon a week for the good of our health. The UK Food Standards Agency's website should surely provide clear guidance. That's why the agency was set up in the wake of the BSE affair. But it's anything but clear.
I think the problem that I have with these sorts of data are really the fact that you have to dig to get the whole picture. I mean, snippets of information in one place, snippets of information in another, and assembling the whole picture is actually quite a tricky one.
But it's so contradictory, because in this paragraph it tells you that you should eat 2 portions of fish, one of which should be oily fish. In the very next paragraph...
The website recommends we eat 1 portion of oily fish a week, but says nothing about the consumption of more than 1 portion, or about young children and pregnant mothers. From the Food Standards Agency, established last year, we're promised honest and independent guidance on the safety of everything we consume. Here, surely, we shall get comprehensive answers to our questions. Our interview, attended by a press officer, was given by Dr. Nigel Harrison, an expert in the agency's contaminants division.
It is only necessary to eat 1 portion of oily fish, and that will give you the full benefits with the associated reduction in heart disease without having any risk of exceeding the safety guidelines for chemicals that might be present in those fish.
So do you actually discount the evidence that, that even background levels of PCBs can produce learning difficulties in children and that they can produce immune deficiency problems as well?
I'm not discounting that evidence. What I'm saying is that this evidence and other related evidence is under review at the moment by an expert advisory committee who will advise us whether we need to take any action as a result of studies such as that. Our advice is that it is important to eat at least 1 portion of oily fish per week. As I've said before, the benefits from eating that fish would outweigh any potential concerns due to the chemicals that might be present in that fish. If we're looking at PCBs and dioxins, these have any potential effects there might be are very long term, and the consumption over a short period with anyone's lifetime is relatively unimportant compared to their lifetime consumption.
Is the Food Standards Agency happy with the idea of small children eating several portions of farmed salmon? Is that okay, as far as you're concerned?
As I say, what is important is to have a balanced diet. And within a balanced diet, it's only necessary to eat one portion of oily fish.
Yeah, I know, but you cannot actually, I'm sorry, just 1 minute. You cannot determine what a family is going to feed their children. They may be feeding more than one portion. Now, is that therefore okay?
What they are doing is they need to follow a balanced diet. Now, if they consider that eating several portions of fish is a balanced diet, well, that is their particular choice. Our advice is, and an expert committee advice, is that it's only necessary to eat one portion of fish. So it is not necessary to eat more than one portion of fish to get the health benefits.
What's necessary, we're talking about what's desirable.
And that was it. The press officer concluded the interview, leaving us with the assurance that one portion a week of farmed salmon is fine, and that any more is just a matter of personal choice. Miriam Jacobs disagrees, at least with the assertion that the intake of toxins balances out over a lifetime.
Well, what do you say to the argument that small children may be more vulnerable to these toxins with their low body weight, but, you know, it evens out as they grow bigger and older?
There are critical windows of development in the fetus and the infant and the young child. Those developmental windows are present for a very short space of time. If those windows are perturbed, that's it for life. It can't be regained later on.
And there is another cause for concern, an echo of the BSE affair. While filming at this processing plant, we learned that waste materials like this, the salmon offal and offcuts, will end up as feed for other livestock.
What we're doing is actually maximising human exposure to these chemicals through promoting what's essentially a highly artificial food chain. Not only are you taking food resources from the natural environment that are contaminated and concentrating them, if you like, into the salmon, but that you're then taking the residues from these salmon and putting them into other areas of livestock. And ultimately, of course, all of these practices lead to products that are consumed by human beings.
Aquaculturalists are well aware of the problem of contaminants in the feed, and they believe it is avoidable. They're devising simpler and cheaper ways of testing the salmon diet, even considering the removal of contaminants. But the more immediate solution must lie in trying to obtain fish meal and oil from uncontaminated sources. Nutrico claims to be attempting just that.
We all know the effects of dioxins and PCBs on the human health. So what we have in place is specific regulation of quality assurance programs within Nutrico, focusing on areas where there are low or no dioxin and PCB levels in the raw materials. And we have monitoring systems in place also on a regular basis to analyze that what is delivered to our plants is within the limits we have. One of the major problems with these analyses is that there is limited capacity today in Europe, and they are very time-consuming.
Could you put your hand on your heart and say you can eat as much farmed salmon as you like and it won't harm you? In fact, it'll be good for you.
It will be good for you to eat salmon.
I don't eat it myself, and I think that as things stand, I shall continue to be one of those people that does not eat farmed salmon.
Aquaculture is here to stay. But it must surely be done better. The industry is taking steps to control escapes and disease, and to reduce environmental damage. But contaminants cast a shadow, and so does overproduction. Here at Loch Ewe, in response to pressure from the public, the authorities have demanded a reduction in output. There are signs that regulation is becoming tougher, and that saving the environment is a consideration, as well as the provision of jobs and the making of profits. As aquaculturalists are keen to point out, theirs is a young industry still finding its way. Even so, it seems that little has been learned from other, older, intensive farming systems. The same mistakes have been made, with the emphasis always on greater and greater productivity, achieved with little regard for the welfare of the creatures being farmed. There's also been a lack of candour and of honest discussion about the impact on wild fish populations and on the wider environment. Once again, the familiar and dangerous assumption that we can always have mastery over nature is producing uncomfortable consequences and even risks for human health. When you next buy farmed salmon at an attractive price, ponder for a moment on the real cost of that fish.
And what we've got here is mature brown trout. There's been no salmon and there was one sea trout. And what that basically means is that there'll be no salmon spawning this year at all. And that's despite the fact that 700 smolts went to sea last year. So we'd have expected some of them back, but nothing has come back. And if that happens again next year and the year after, then we're certainly looking at an extinction scenario, which in fact is exactly the same as is happening in other rivers of the same size in this area. So it's not particularly surprising. But from a personal point of view, it's pretty depressing because there's really nothing that we can do about it.
At Willie McIntosh's netting station, catches continue to dwindle. His total haul this time is 2 salmon. The larger is an escaped farm fish, and the smaller a grilse, a wild salmon that has been 1 year at sea. To the practiced eye, the two are totally different. The farm fish could never be mistaken for its wild relative.
Small fish.
What are you going to do with these fish then?
Well, with the farm fish, I'll probably feed it to the dogs. With this one, you're looking at the last grills that I'll ever caught at Red Point. Probably get it staffed.
Are you serious about that? I mean, you think
totally
that...
serious.
So you're giving up fishing?
That was my total catch for the day.
So that's, as far as you're concerned, the last fish?
The last fish that I'll catch legally in Red Point, in the Bagnet. And this is the last station that kept going on the west coast.
That's sad.
Well, that's life. And it's no one to blame but the politicians for letting the people interfere with nature. That's all what it comes down to. Nothing else. Interfering with nature.
For further information on the programme and to join a debate on fish farming, log on to www.bbc.co.uk/nature.
The surprising side of the Victorians.
These innocent buildings drove Jonathan Meads to drink, destitution,